What does illegal camping, basement bathrooms, weather forecasts, and Sitting Bull in 1881 have in common? It was all part of a 1943 spy novel written by Andrew Jackson. That's not true at all. But we do know some other stuff that's pretty reliable. And we'll find out tonight on Drinking Through History. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in to a pretty special regimental episode of Drinking Through History. And I'm joined with four fantastic living historians tonight. Tuning in, we've got Mr. Alec Stork, who's going to be talking to us tonight. Alec, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am a history major at the University of Mary currently, and I work at Fort Abraham Lincoln State Park as a historical and cultural interpreter. Additionally, I am the vice president of the Company D 5th Minnesota Infantry Living History Group on the side.
Thanks for joining us tonight, Alec.
Cool.
Casey Stork is not your name at all. That would be Alec's last name. I
We're
haven't
brothers.
even barely had anything to drink yet tonight, so this is fun. Casey, how about you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, my name's Casey Beck. I am the president of Company D, 5th Minnesota Infantry Living History Group. I'm an educator and living historian here in North Dakota and really excited to be here tonight.
Thanks for joining us tonight, Casey. And we got Mr. Ben Gjorven. How about you introduce yourself, Ben?
Hello, my name is Ben Gjorven. I'm president of 6th Infantry at Fort Beaufort.
And Ben, you've got a background in history as well, too, right?
I do. I went to NDSU for public history. I'm a machinist, though, but I have worked at interpretation at Fort Beaufort.
Gotcha. Thanks for joining us tonight, Ben. And then finally, we've got Mr. Brandon Delvo. Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Leif. First off, thanks for having me on. I'm Brandon Delvo, like you said. I'm from Williston, North Dakota. Got my history degree from the University of Jamestown, and I'm a member of the Fort Beaufort 6th Infantry, along with Ben and you as well, Leif, and just a member of various historical groups, and have my own historical consulting business as well.
You've got a wonderful podcast called The Past Less Traveled as well, which folks I'm hoping have gone and checked out. We've talked about that a little bit. So yeah, so that leaves me the only one without a degree in history in the panel tonight. If you didn't know, I'm an elementary school teacher. Although for the past decade, I've been working for the National Park Service in the summertime at a national historic site that deals with the fur trade. As well as that, I'm a member of the Fort Beaufort 6th Infantry Regimental Association, getting to do interp at places like Fort Beaufort, and gotten to do it actually with our entire panel tonight. So we'll get down to it then, guys. Let's start with illegal camping. Alec, tell us a little bit about illegal camping.
Gladly. So on the idea of connecting illegal camping with our certain regiment, we are looking at specifically the illegal camping that was very rampant in 1872, 1873 on the upper Missouri in the vicinity of what is today Bismarck and Mandan, North Dakota. So Bismarck conceived in 1872 as actually multiple different townships. Eventually, you see the following year would get specifically the township of Edwinton would become what is Bismarck. But prior to that, it was essentially a massive collection of tent cities of crazy individuals who were willing to throw caution to the wind, come to Dakota Territory, and try and make the best of what was the intended rail line route for the Northern Pacific Railroad as it was barreling on down to the Missouri River in 1872. So in the year prior, there were surveyors who had come out and established where they were intending to have the crossing point of that NPR railroad across the Missouri. And once that was known knowledge, multiple people were coming out here and trying to stake land claims to, profit off where that rail line was going to be coming through. So this led to pretty much a massive city of squatters, where three distinct little townships cropped up. You had the one right along the riverbank, where again, pretty much everybody that was coming out here was like 99% confident this is where it's crossing, was called Carleton. And then just east of it, directly east of it, where the modern airport is in Bismarck, North Dakota, is where the little township of Burlington cropped up. Same deal. They were fairly confident rail lines would become right there. And then the oddball was the one just north of it on swell of land, north of both of those sections, which was established as Edwinton. And the funny thing is, everyone was so confident that it was coming through this lower part of the area, where they had established Burlington was where they had actually already done like railroad grading. So they were, again, when I say 99% sure, that was pretty confident. But the crazy thing is that it was decided actually to reroute the railroad up to that swell of land. So Edwinton is where Bismarck ended up being. And for the next year or two, you saw these other little town sites, Carleton and Burlington, just really become these weird little half, establishments of squatters. Specifically, you saw an area that was actually on the river also kind of crop up alongside that as a place where a lot of squatters started to flock to. And that was this area called Sibley Island. So named after General Henry Sibley, who had led an expedition into the area in 1863. Sibley Island was essentially this very large island, actually, that had formed in the middle of the Missouri River and was actually a huge lumber source in the area. And of course, if you know anything about North Dakota, you know that trees were a pretty hot commodity. They were hard to get away from the river. So that became a very important site for not only the township starting to crop up over there, but also the Army. So the first establishment that was in the vicinity, the first permanent establishment that started to be created, was actually the military post on the west side of the river. So Bismarck's on the east side, and that's where the railroad was coming from St. Paul and made its way in 1872 out here. But right prior to that, the U.S. Army, following in that was something that was certainly going on very prevalently at the time, was the Army was kind of building these forts alongside the path of the railroad to help with its construction, to help ensure safety of its construction. And so that was what was going on here. So across from the intended crossing was established Fort McKean in 1872, which a very ramshackle post, constructed on top of a hill on the west side of the river, across from where they thought the crossing point of the railroad was going to be. It was established by elements of the 6th U.S. Infantry, as well as elements of the 17th Infantry, would help come in and build that. But companies B and C were the first ones there. Companies B and C of the 6th U.S. Infantry were the first ones on site. They actually had a temporary camp prior to that that they had established called Camp Green, that they were in just very shortly alongside the river before they got the orders to permanently establish Fort McKean up on the hill, a couple miles north of that spot. When I say ramshackle, I mean ramshackle. This was, honestly, I believe, all the readings I've done, there's a lot of great information on the medical history of Fort Abraham Lincoln. I say Abraham Lincoln because if you're not aware, Fort McKean only held that name for a couple of months before it was redesignated as Fort Abraham Lincoln. But from its earlier days, honestly, up to its decommissioning, this was a very poorly maintained post. And we're going to touch on that a little later when Casey talks about just how bad it got in some of the later years. But even early on, it was a very thrown together post, essentially. I know they ended up on top of that hill, and again, this is on top of one of the taller hills in the area, so you are exposed to the elements en masse, essentially. So North Dakota, you know that it is very windy, and when you're on top of a hill with absolutely zero coverage, it is very uncomfortable, very unpleasant. And that goes that way as well when it comes to not only wind, but rain and snow. And you're getting all that here in Dakota Territory, as well as heat. You don't have any coverage from the sun up there. So it was not a pleasant place to be, certainly. But they were there again for the intention of mostly assisting and protecting the railroad and its construction once it got onto the west side of the river. But additionally, you saw as that railroad was coming and as these squatters were starting to come in, a very important aspect of the early mission from Fort Abraham Lincoln was ensuring that squatters stayed off of government land. And that was the thing about Sibley Island I mentioned earlier. That was government land. That was there to provide a lumber source for the army that was constructing these posts. And again, trees, not a lot of them around. You need wood to construct these posts. Yeah, Sibley Island, again, like I said, you start to see a big influx of these squatters start to move into the island and start getting lumber. They start erecting little, crop up tree cutting, like lumberjack entities within the island and are quickly trying to, take what wood they can and get it off. And so the 6th Infantry is constantly, a mission of theirs is to constantly go down and evict these squatters off of that land. And that was a pretty prominent mission of theirs for a while, again, with the anticipation of the railroad coming. But that was the thing. Once the railroad arrived in Bismarck the following year in 1873, that is when you see the Panic of 1873 occur. And that results in a halt of that rail line's construction for almost a decade. It isn't until the late 70s when rail line construction gets back going again. So you have this post that does expand in 1873. You see that's when they also add the adjoining cavalry post at Fort Lincoln, formerly Fort McKean. And it swells to be a pretty large post, a very active post, but still a ramshackle post. The intention behind it was not to be a very permanent post from its beginning, but it ended up being an active military fort for a good long while, not getting decommissioned until 1891. That eviction of squatters and that constant maintaining of keeping civilians off of the federal land in the area kind of became more of a priority mission for the Army, and especially the 6th Infantry in the area, while the 7th Cavalry definitely took up a bit more of a mantle when it came to pursuing local Sioux elements in the area. But the 6th Infantry, of course, did its part in providing for the various expeditions, whether it was, to the Yellowstone or to the Bighorn in 76. But the 6th Infantry, while they were stationed at Fort Lincoln, and I could be wrong, I'm fairly confident they were the longest, the Company B of the 6th Infantry was, I believe, the longest standing unit at Fort Abraham Lincoln. They're there from its conception well into the 80s, I believe. They have a very close tie with the fort. And while they're there for all these years, you do see alcoholism as a rampant problem, believe it or not, on a frontier fort, but especially at Fort Abraham Lincoln. And so this is something that was very affecting to the soldiers of not only Company B of the 6th, but all the various companies of the 7th Infantry and the 17th Infantry that were stationed there in the time as well. And you see specifically in one of those old squatter shanty towns, a cropping up of a den of scum and villainy, essentially, that does get produced in the remains of one of these squatter towns, was in formerly Carleton, and it's very famously referred to as the Point or Whiskey Point in some of the documents you find. And it was essentially just a mass collection of various brothels and saloons in the area. But beyond that, that was also something very prevalent in Bismarck proper as well. Famously, an area of Bismarck, or infamously, I should say, an area of Bismarck that cropped up was called Bloody Fourth for 4th Street in downtown Bismarck, which was another centralized location where you saw a lot of saloons, a lot of brothels, and a lot of alcohol available. And so you saw soldiers were constantly going over to these locations on the other side of the river just as an effort to obtain alcohol and women. And so you see this results in a lot of alcohol-related disease start to be very prevalent at Fort Abraham Lincoln, and a lot of just alcohol-related deaths. There's crazy stories that you find, especially in the medical history, that detail some of these. We were talking just before we started the show here, but there's an account in 1874 where there's 2 cavalrymen and a courtesan, is what the official report calls her, who had acquired a canoe and were attempting to paddle across the fort to get to Whiskey Point, and it capsized and they all drowned just because they were trying to get over to Whiskey Point. There's another one where a gunfight essentially ensues in the town of Bismarck, where you see the surgeon attests that it was alcohol induced, but a citizen in Bismarck ends up shooting one of the cavalrymen to death. And then a couple days later, 2 other soldiers go back and kill this civilian as retribution. And so you see beyond that, there's, like I said, a lot of disease starts to be very prevalent for these soldiers here. There's an account from one of the surgeons, I believe it's 1874 or 3, I can't remember, where the surgeon gets a shipment of whiskey for medicinal purposes, and he essentially walks away for a while and comes back, and a bunch of it's been stolen by soldiers, and he has to go and track it down. And so you see, while evicting squatters and illegal camping was certainly something to preoccupy the soldiers of the 6th Infantry while they're at Fort Abraham Lincoln, that wasn't enough for them. And when you're isolated on a horrible hill exposed to wind and rain and snow and sun, with very little, human contact aside from going over to the saloons in Bismarck or your fellow soldiers, alcohol is something to turn to, absolutely. And that was something that was very prevalent for soldiers at Fort Abraham Lincoln, absolutely. And with that, I'll end my rant on illegal camping and the 6th Infantry.
So we see where we've got these changes and what happens, the effects, the being exposed on the top of the hill, being out in the middle of nowhere, and it can start to take its toll on people after a while. And especially with those settlements that were propping up the way you've described them, things are getting rough. They're not ideal. In fact, for those that were there at Fort McKean, it wasn't always ideal either, which brings us to the next topic of basement bathrooms. We're going to have Casey Beck, because that's his name, is Casey Beck. Casey, talk to us about those basement bathrooms.
Yeah, so as Alex said, the first few years and really the whole history of Fort Abraham Lincoln, the Post just has issue after issue after issue with buildings just not being built for what they needed to be used for, and the men in those barracks, in those buildings, using them for what they were not supposed to be used for. Case in point, when the Fort McKean, the infantry post, is first built, it's all cottonwood. It's horrible. It warps, it deteriorates. There's mentions of cracks in the wood that are about that big in the wintertime. And winter gets to be pretty rough on the plains of Dakota Territory, as I think we are all very well aware of. And so throughout the 1870s, guys had to get pretty creative. So I'm actually just going to read off of the surgeon's report for Fort Abraham Lincoln, going from February and March of 1878, because I think it paints a pretty clear picture of what is happening. This is from February, like I said, of 1878. So the Post has been around for 6 years at this point. The sinks in the barracks are getting in a most filthy condition. I judge that no system of disinfection or police is observed to make them less disagreeable and filthy. He then goes on the next month, in March 1878, to state this. I would respectfully call attention to the fact that a large number of men suffer with affections of the lungs and believe great benefit to health would result from a freer ventilation of the barracks and a frequent airing of bedding and clothing. The bedding and etc. could be shaken and aired once a week, which it was already supposed to be by regulation, but apparently they were not doing. The cellars beneath company kitchens at the infantry barracks are in a neglected condition and are occupied principally with rubbish. The cellar under the kitchens of the infantry barracks have been used freely as a sink. So what the surgeon is telling us is that the cellars, the places to store things underneath these barracks, the men are not going outside to use the bathroom. In one of the other records, they state they drilled a hole in the cellar and were using that as their bathroom. So you can imagine the smell, the disease, the assorted issues that are going to come from 40, 50, 60 men who are going number one and going number two in a hole that is next to your kitchen, that is next to your food, that is probably 30 feet away from where you sleep. And so at that point, it was the 6th, the 7th, and beginning the 1st Infantry to be at Fort Abraham Lincoln at that time in the late 1870s. But man, you can't imagine how bad a North Dakota winter is, that it's so bad you don't want to leave your barracks that you are willing to drill a hole in your floor into your basement to use the bathroom so you don't have to go outside. But that's what these guys were facing every single day as part of the infantry up at Fort McKean, and having spent numerous years as a historical and cultural interpreter up at Fort Abraham Lincoln State Park, I can tell you the winters up there are bad. And when you're on that infantry post hill, it's even worse. So sometimes I don't know if I even blame these guys for just walking 20 feet to the other room and using the bathroom. So that's the story of basement bathrooms. Although that's kind of a two-story bathroom, if you ask me, because you're going on the first floor and then it's descending into the basement. So I think that's a two-story bathroom.
Yeah, and at that point, it's like it's that bad where the guys just don't care, you know.
No, they don't. And for some reason, when you look at the post returns for the late 1870s and especially the 1880s, desertion at Fort Lincoln is skyrocketing, and I cannot imagine why that would be.
So we've talked about the so that discusses our basement bathrooms or two-story bathrooms as we've learned about the weather playing an active role in that. It can get rather harsh the winters that we have on the North Dakota Montana border, as we've all experienced for those of us who live here. If only there was a way that we could learn what weather is doing. So we're going to turn over to Ben Gjorven, and he's going to let us know about weather forecasts, the National Weather Service, and telegraphs.
Well, the signals assign the duties of tracking weather. Now, that was for military purposes and also civilian purposes as well. So they established a whole network that Western Union, other places that handle telegraph. So they went through that to get it expanded out further westward out to our area. And one of the places that they stopped at was Fort Buford. Fort Buford's telegraph arrived out here in 1878, and it was established to serve also civilian purposes for river boats going up and down the river. And Colonel William B. Hazen was stationed out at Fort Buford. He did not like it out there. He hated it out there. It was as he would put it, splendid isolation, although I don't think he used those words. And he took that as an opportunity to get back to Washington, D.C., where he actually wanted to be. He was a politician in reality. He was not really an army man. So as soon as he saw that opportunity, he latched onto it because this was his ticket out of here. And he utilized the telegraph to not only tell the force private that was in charge of the station out here. He told him to help Fort Abercrombie, no, rather not Fort Abercrombie, but Assiniboine, to track weather systems that were coming from Montana over to here and just see how long it would take. And when it took that far, or however long it took, and he was able to track it, it proved to Washington, D.C. that he had the stuff to, move on. So when Myers, who was actually in charge of the Signal Corps, when he passed away in 1880, he was put in charge of the Signal Corps, and he was transferred back over to Washington, D.C., where he actually wanted to be. He passed away in 1887. Of course, his tenure through that was marked by, let's just say, Trump has had similar situations. So, but what other politician has? So, but due to his diligence and tracking weather for those 7 years that he was in charge, a lot of things in the Weather Service today trace back to his efforts back at Fort Buford.
Now, with the telegraph lines, the way that they were being utilized, if you've got a guy at Buford who's constantly giving an update back to DC, what does that do to all the other people that are wanting to use these telegraph lines?
Well, they did not appreciate too much. When you're running telegraph, you're running over one wire. Everybody has to use that one wire. So if that's being tied up because Hazen is on the line, there's nothing they can do. The only way they can interrupt them is by opening the line. And you're not going to do that for a bird colonel in the Army.
No. So 1880, that switchover happens, lasts till 87. A little bit past that, though, in 1881, we've got a situation taking place. Now, we're not in that area of Bismarck, North Dakota anymore. We are further west in the vicinity of what becomes Williston, North Dakota, in a community that is propped up around a military post called Fort Buford. So 1881, Brandon, we're going to turn it on over to you. Tell us about what was taking place then.
So really, before we get into 1881, we got to kind of rewind the clocks, back, and just a little bit, even just the role Fort Buford plays in a lot of things. So obviously 1876, it's a pretty, milestone year in the Indian Wars. It's also the centennial of the United States at the time. There's a lot going on. Custer and some elements of the 7th Cavalry get wiped out at the Little Bighorn. And, it's touted as this big victory for the tribes. And really, it kind of also at the same time is signaling the beginning of the end. And so it's kind of just this big running campaign, essentially, across Montana. And you get, the battles of the Big Hole, Bear Paw Mountain. I mean, all these different things where the tribes are getting chased up into Canada. So with that, you have Sitting Bull and other bands of Native Americans are trying to seek refuge up there in Canada. And the Canadians, or the Mounties, I should say, let them in. And it kind of develops into this tenuous relationship. one account actually has Sitting Bull getting into an argument with Major Walsh of the Northwest Mounted Police at the time, and things really come to a head when Sitting Bull shakes his finger at Walsh. Walsh doesn't like that. He basically knocks him down on the floor, and when Sitting Bull tries to get up, he kicks him in the butt. And Sitting Bull doesn't like that further, and it kind of comes into this tense moment where Walsh is standing in front of his men, and Sitting Bull is just kind of taunting him, staring at him, and it's I don't think anybody had ever really done that to Sitting Bull before, so it's a little probably damaging to the ego at the same time. I mean, we're all human at the end of the day, but as time goes on, I mean, that they're starving. They're slowly starting to go south of the international line, trying to hunt buffalo. Well, who's waiting on the other side of that international line? You have Nelson Miles and a whole bunch of troops stationed along there. Essentially, just they're doing these running skirmishes, and it's all based around just simple subsistence. And it's only a matter of time where these tribes they can't sustain themselves anymore. And Sitting Bull feels at the time somewhat betrayed that the Great White Mother and Queen Victoria is not caring for them. And so you start to see these tribes start to trickle back down. Well, as they're trickling back further south, they're coming into government authority hands. So we get into July of 1881, and Sitting Bull and his remaining band are making their way to Fort Buford. He arrives on July 19th, and they do more of a formal type ceremony on the 20th. And that's right there at the site. The Bretherton House, or the field officers' quarters, is there on the site. It happened right there in the parlor, gentlemen. It's the original building. Really well-known account is Crowfoot, who is Sitting Bull's son. Sitting Bull essentially hands over his Winchester rifle to Crowfoot, who thus then hands over the rifle to Major Bretherton, who's in command of the post at the time, basically in kind of that last act of defiance, as where Sitting Bull can confidently say, well, I really never formally handed over my rifle. I kind of gave it to the middleman, hence his son. And then really from there, they're encamped for a while. Actually, we have a neighbor just down the street. You met her, Anita Williamson Leif, this weekend. A relative of hers actually laundered Sitting Bull's clothing while he was in government authority hands at Fort Buford. I was blown away when Anita tells me this. But really, he kind of goes, Sitting Bull and the remaining Native Americans, go through the government system. They eventually make their way down to Standing Rock, or Fort Yates, and then further south. And kind of from there, they're brought into this, trying to be, this existence of farming. If you know anything about the land down there, a lot of the soil and a lot of other things are really not the best for farming. As a lot of dry cropland type farming is not really very prevalent in North Dakota until well over the turn of the century, and it's even a little scarce for raising beef cattle at times, just given the extremes. So it's tough. And Sitting Bull unfortunately meets his end in December of 1890. And Major Walsh, once again, we're going back to this guy where they have a standoff essentially, or kind of get into a tussle. Makes some remarks that, I mean, he didn't get along with him in the end, but he was a man that really wanted justice. He was, he's a medicine man. He's not a warrior. But given his status in the tribe, given the fact that he said he was a man of good heart, and he really just wanted the best for the people that were below him. So he regrets that he couldn't see him one last time and travel down to Standing Rock to see him. But I mean, I think that's really powerful that a guy who essentially squares off with him and they leave on a bad note can really reflect and say that. I mean, this guy did have the best at heart for what he wanted for his people.
So 1881, we've got Sitting Bull, and we've got his surrenders there, and there's a lot of layers that was taking place in that. We heard the expression "splendid isolation" being used. Both these places, both Fort McKean, Fort Abraham Lincoln, and places like Fort Buford, they were kind of experiencing that splendid isolation. Despite that, though, there were things that did take place at these different military posts where sometimes more so it was on the officers' side that they would do things to kind of make things a little bit more like home, to provide a little bit of enjoyment. And sometimes those things were company balls, which did take place at places like Fort Abraham Lincoln and Fort Buford. That's actually what brings us to tonight's beverage. It would not be uncommon for some type of punch, so a punch bowl with an alcoholic punch in it, being used at some of these festivities. If you have followed at all anything about the Sanford diary that the 6th has been posting on their regimental page, he talks about these from time to time, and he's just unimpressed. I don't know. Sanford had a rough time, I think, but I think he had a good time. He was constantly writing letters to people, ended up working in the library and learning how to bind books and all that kind of stuff, and gives us a wonderful insight through Company G, anyway, of the 6th Infantry, of the things that were taking place there. So tonight's beverage actually it's called Chatham Artillery Punch. And while it likely wasn't a member of the Chatham Artillery, but someone associated with them that would end up coming up with this, that they used to welcome back. The Chatham Artillery was a Savannah regiment, and they were welcoming back another Savannah regiment called the Republican Blues. And these guys organized way back in 1808. They're both Savannah regiments. And this is what was done as kind of a welcome back, and it's lasted a long time. In its original version, it was actually mixed in what sometimes is referred to as a horse trough, these large 3-ish some odd gallon leather water buckets that was used for the livestock, with ice thrown in on top, and it was potent. And as time goes on, it changes. In an earlier version, they've got black tea is in there along with the rest of the other components. By the time you get into the 1870s, 1880s, it's almost all booze, with the exception of a thing called Oleo Saccharum, which is essentially you're taking sugar, the peels from the lemon, just the outside part, which gets macerated in there. It liquefies, pull those oil out, and then you throw the lemon juice in, and you've got this high concentrate lemon that you would use to flavor beverages. The later and later it gets used, it does change. It's still potent, but it's less potent. In fact, David Wondrich, who's done a lot of research on this, he talks about how later on in the 1900s, the 1907 version of the recipe for Chatham Artillery Punch, there was a note left with it that says, "Experience has taught the rising generation to modify the receipt or recipe of their forefathers to conform to the weaker constitutions of their progeny." In other words, we can't handle our alcohol the same way our forefathers did in the military service. And so it ends up changing. The version of the recipe that we are using tonight is very appropriate if you are an 1870s, 1880s living historian, especially on the military living history side, which all 5 of us are. In fact, we got to enjoy this at an event that most of us were at, and where we had a way of our own regimental ball. I'm not going to say that it was Libby Custer's Punch Bowl that it was served in, but there'll be a graphic popping up on the screen here that we all did imbibe from. It's a potent, heady grog. So this is what you're going to need. If you are at an event, 20 some odd people, this will get you through. Not everyone's going to have gobs, but keep in mind, this is pretty potent. If you've got, say, a contingent of 20 people that are going to be enjoying this at a living history event, this is what you are going to need. You are going to need 18 ounces of lemon Oleo Saccharum. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. You're going to need one regular sized bottle of brandy or cognac. Go with the cognac. You're going to like it better. One regular bottle of bourbon, one bottle of Jamaican rum. I recommend nothing less than an Appleton Estate. An Appleton Estate doesn't break the bank. And then you're going to need, count them, 3 regular sized bottles of dry champagne. And it's all going to go into a punch bowl that holds 3 gallons or more. You're going to fill that halfway with ice. And you're not going to put the champagne in first. You're going to keep that chilled till about before you're ready to serve it. The Oleo Saccharum is going to go in, the cognac, the bourbon, the Jamaican rum. Keep in mind, that's a bottle of each of those. Now, that Oleo Saccharum, we've talked about a little bit. To make this, so 18 ounces of lemon Oleo Saccharum, figure roughly that you're getting 2 ounces of juice from each lemon that you've got, okay? Now, according to David Wondrich, the way that he suggests doing this is the way that I've done it. It's worked out well. I've had no complaints to this point. For every lemon that you use, you are going to use 2 ounces of sugar. So you're gonna take those lemons, you're gonna thinly take like a vegetable peeler, thinly peel the rinds off. You're gonna throw them in like a large mason jar, like a 1 quart canning jar, and then you're gonna put 2 ounces of sugar for every lemon that goes in there. So in this case, it would be 9 lemons. So 9 times 2, 18. You're gonna put 18 ounces of sugar in there. You're going to shake it all up, let it set overnight. It's going to pull all those oils out. The next day, you're going to put the juice of those 9 lemons in. That's going to bring you up to roughly 18 ounces. Let that sit in the fridge until you're ready for your event. Do this 3 or 4 days ahead of time. You're going to be fine. So that'll end up going in the punch bowl. Just pour the whole thing in, even with the rinds. Throw in your brandy, throw in your bourbon, throw in your Jamaican rum, and then say 15 minutes before you're going to actually have people getting to enjoy this, the company ball is taking place, pour in those 3 bottles of your dry champagne. Go with a good quality one. Gently mix it around. Historically, at a fancy ball where they actually had the punch glasses, these were about 3-ounce servings. If you're at the ones that I've been to, we don't have access to that, and everyone pulls out their tin cup and gets to enjoy what's going on. I guarantee there will be none left that's inside that bowl. But Leif, you may be thinking, I'd like to not make enough for an entire regiment. I'd like to enjoy this at home. So if that's what you'd like to do, in fact, that's what the 5 of us have done this evening. Here's how you can make a single serving of this. You're going to take 3/4 to 1 ounce of your lemon Oleo Saccharum that we've described making. If you don't feel comfortable making that, take 1/2 ounce of fresh squeezed lime juice with 1 ounce of simple syrup. Simple syrup is an equal combination usually of water to sugar. So 1 ounce of simple syrup to 1/2 ounce of lemon juice instead of that Oleo Saccharum. You're going to put in a 1/2 ounce of bourbon, a 1/2 ounce of cognac, a 1/2 ounce of Jamaican rum, and 1 to 2 ounces of that dry champagne, depending on how you like to taste things. And then you're going to grate a little bit of nutmeg on top. And that is Chatham Artillery Punch. As you've noticed, the only thing in there that is not alcoholic is that lemon Oleo Saccharum that's in there. I'm going to bring us back into gallery view so we can all talk about it. Gentlemen, what's your thoughts?
I'll say.
Oh, go ahead, Casey. Go ahead.
The version that I'm drinking is definitely. I had to take a lot of liberties. Like I said, I was busy, so I didn't get to make the whole thing. But it was the absolute perfect drink, I think, for when we had it at our kind of stag party at Fort Abraham Lincoln, the Living History Garrison we did a couple of years ago. That was just the perfect drink for, I think, what we were going for the period, for some tours of some historic sites. That it was a good lubricant for all of those things. So I'm a big fan, and I'd love to have it again at another event, I think.
Yeah, I'll say that the recipe itself can be a daunting one to read, essentially to look at. When you are considering that this is a this is a concoction that is largely booze. And it might not sound appealing, but it was phenomenal at the Living History event, and it's phenomenal in the condensed, single serving portion tonight. And that's because I think that Oleo Saccharum, and even I didn't even have the time to make the Oleo Saccharum. I'm just doing the lemon and simple syrup. It does its job so well in providing that sweetness and that kind of acidity needed to pull away from the booze. And it goes well with the bite of the champagne, that it really results in a drink that is dangerously drinkable. And I remember it was dangerous that evening at Fort Abraham Lincoln, and it did its job well. So definitely use caution when using this recipe, because it is tasty, and it is a good one to throw back, and you don't feel like you're drinking a ton of booze until it's too late. So that being said, it is a really just well conceived drink. It is balanced, and it's had its time over the years to from its conception with the original recipe, even up until the 1880s. It had developed well enough, and then into the 1900s, that it is certainly approachable, drinkable, enjoyable.
You're here.
Yes, like I said, Alec said, yeah, it's pretty good. Watch out.
This is the weird spot where everyone's just enjoying it, and it's been a long day.
Yeah.
Alternatively, I'll say it's good, man. Yeah.
All right, so that's really encourage you guys, if you want to try something historic at your next event for whoever is there, because a lot of these events, it's not just guys. We try to have these events where we've got the people that was at those places represented. There were laundresses at these posts, and they played a huge role in what was going on at these different sites. So to be able to, even if it's just a small gathering of living historians, you don't need to shy away from not having women living historians, because they are representing that part of the story as well too that's taking place there. So take this recipe, enjoy it with fellow living historians, and just enjoy that time that you get to spend with like-minded people, sharing our passion with the public in ways that helps the public understand more that, this wasn't just some place where soldiers were there or Indians were there, whatever, and stuff happened, but getting to share what the lives were like for those people, because those were real people that experienced real things that were in those places. And at the end of the day, this is something that these people would have been able to enjoy. So it can add a little something to the event that you've got going on. Or like what we're doing tonight, we're doing the single serving portion that we can enjoy and get to taste this history together. So I'll wrap it up here. I'll give everyone a chance to say some parting words. Alec, I'm gonna toss it back to you to say some final thoughts here. And then Alec and Casey, I'm gonna have you guys talk about what Company D of the 5th Minnesota is doing here this summer.
So first of all, thanks for having me on, having all of us on. It's fun to be able to tie in, the history of alcohol and drinking and booze and cocktails is a very rich one, and it's a fun one, especially for the time period that we get to do out here in our neck of the woods in North Dakota. Absolutely, it's a very Renaissance time almost for drinking. So it's fun to be able to tie in both the military history out here and the drinking history, absolutely, and the cocktail history. So thanks for having us here. And then to plug kind of what Company D, 5th Minnesota Infantry Living History Organization has going on this summer. I switched up my hat brass here to talk about one event we're doing, which is in August. Let me get the exact dates real quick. I believe it's August 2nd through the 4th. Yes, August 2nd through the 4th, Friday through Sunday. We've got, once again, another living history event at Fort Abraham Lincoln State Park. where this time around we're actually depicting the 7th Cavalry. This time we're doing the 7th Cavalry, specifically 150 years ago is the time frame we're focusing on, in the summer of 1874, when you saw most of the post was actually gone away from the fort on the Black Hills expedition. So George Custer and the 7th Cavalry and elements of the infantry had gone down into what is today South Dakota, into the Black Hills, having adventure, gallivanting around down in South Dakota. Meanwhile, at Fort Abraham Lincoln, in that horrible little isolated spot of North Dakota that we talked about, where you are getting the sun beating down on you along the Missouri River, you had the poor fellas of the 7th Cavalry who were the remain behind element and were forced to essentially stay back, maybe to their pleasure, because you're seeing, most of the officers and most of the big wigs of the post were gone, or maybe to their detriment because they are stuck in the boredom and that splendid isolation of Fort Abraham Lincoln. So that's what we're depicting, is that time frame of summer of 1874, the elements of the 7th Cavalry that had to stay back and keep the lights on, essentially, at Fort Abraham Lincoln with our event No Depredation. And that'll be August 2nd through 4th, kind of depicting that real nitty gritty of garrison life for the cavalry and the average cavalryman during mid 1870s.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Casey to give him some final thoughts here. Casey, go ahead and share with us a little bit, and maybe even if someone's interested in your neck of the woods, maybe they're interested in being a part of something awesome like the 5th Minnesota. How about you talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, Company D, 5th Minnesota Living History Organization, we're a authentically minded living history and reenacting group, primarily eastern North Dakota and western Minnesota, although we're kind of expanding right now. Bismarck, Mandan is about as far west as our membership goes, although you guys definitely work very, very closely with us, which we appreciate. And then right now we're actually getting a lot of members in the Twin Cities area. And so really we've created, I think, a great group of guys and gals who really want to do history right. We really focus on getting the little details right. And every event that Alec and I plan and go into as the president and vice president, we're doing hours of research, hours of the minute things that we want to recreate. Both of you guys have been to, or Brandon and Leif have been to our events and know those little things that we like to do and like to add, whether it's the rations we're issuing or the clothing we're wearing. We really want to stress accuracy and documentation, which is a big thing for us. So that's who we are, and you can find us on Facebook as well as our website. And if you ever want to join, get in touch. We're growing pretty fast right now. I mean, we've had, I think, 3 or 4 people reach out in just the last month of trying to join. So it's a great time to join right now, and we've got a lot of awesome things planned for the next couple of years. But Alec plugged one of our great events we're going to do this year at Fort Abraham Lincoln. That's kind of one of our co-home bases. Our other one is Fort Abercrombie, which is just south of Fargo, and we have 2 really awesome events this year lined up there. We always do opening day, which is Memorial Day weekend. And so we're going to be there May 24th and May 25th, living the life of the 10th U.S. Infantry, learning the new Upton's drill as it was prescribed in the late 1860s. And that event is really getting us ready for the next big one that we're helping out with. I know Brandon is helping out with as well, and that's being put on by Austin Haney and the Montana Column Mess, and that's going to be Fort Benton, Nothing Like It in the Territory, which is June 28th through the 30th this summer. That's a really awesome place. It's kind of right before the 4th of July, before that celebration. A great military post, 7th Infantry, a lot of kind of unique mid-1870s stuff happening there. And so definitely you want to check out that Facebook page as well, Nothing Like It in the Territory. We're, of course, then going to come and support Fort Buford, which you guys will talk about here, I'm sure. Our big event this year, we always try to do one big one that we co-sponsor with the Authentic Campaigner, which, as a serious living historian, I think we're all very familiar with. And that's going to be From Prisoner to Prairie at Fort Abercrombie. And that's going to be July 26th to July 28th at Abercrombie, North Dakota. This is our big one. We're really going to try to in-depthly tell the story of the first U.S. volunteers, the galvanized Yankees, the guys from Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, who are captured in 1863 and 1864, sent to Point Lookout Prison, and then take the oath of allegiance and are sent out to North Dakota. They are all over the place in North Dakota: Fort Rice, Fort Union, and Fort Abercrombie. But what we're going to do is kind of bend time and space a little bit and tell their whole story. And that's going to be guys showing up as federal infantry, guys showing up as Confederate prisoners, and we're going to walk the public through what does that whole process look like. We have over 30 people registered right now, so it's definitely probably going to be one of the biggest events in our neck of the woods of the year. So I highly recommend, if you're a living historian in Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota, Iowa, this is where you want to be this summer. And you can check out our website for more details, as well as our Facebook page and the Facebook page for the event, From Prisoner to Prairie at Fort Abercrombie, 1865. Alec talked about No Depredation, which is a great event. We also, for Canton Civil War Days, we're putting together a company for that. Canton Civil War Days is a mainstream battle event near Sioux Falls. But we want to come and do the campaigner thing there, show people the campaigner mindset, the authentic side of the hobby. And so we are putting together a group, a company essentially for that. And you can check out our website and Facebook for that. But that kind of wraps up our summer. We do have a couple other little things in the fall and winter, but those are our big things. Like I said, we're really excited to work with you guys at the 6th Infantry on a couple of different events this summer, and really, really excited. My next event isn't until Fort Benton in June, and that is 2 months away, and I am already getting stir crazy about trying to get to an event as soon as possible, because, as Brandon and I always say, like, you're chasing that dragon and you're never going to reach it. And I got to wear these funny clothes at some point. So that's our lineup for the summer. And I just want to thank you for letting us get on and chat about this.
Oh, absolutely. Casey, thanks again for joining us tonight. Speaking of wearing the funny clothing, we're going to pass it on over to Mr. Brandon Delvo, who's wearing the very sexy dress shako right now. Brandon, how about you talk a little bit about event stuff that we've got going on in the 6th Infantry this summer?
Yeah. So, I mean, once again, it's great to work with other living history groups. I had the benefit of going and joining the 5th Minnesota for their St. Patrick's Day parade in Fargo. I know it, seems simple, it's just a parade, but no, I mean, it was really good to take that in and just portray the Irish Brigade. Hearing just the kids and the people, ooh and ah. Even somebody referred to us as the Union, which is kind of an inside joke with Casey and Alec. I like the tipping of the hat, so I'll end it with the same thing the guy said, thank you. But I mean, just some things that the 6th Infantry has going on going into this summer, and just some other things. We're working on a website, hoping to get that up here in the next couple weeks, and it'll be something that definitely will be building on and working on as time goes on. We had the benefit last weekend with the help of Ben, Leif, Tim Soyseth, who's one of our corporals in the 6th Infantry, and then one of our new members, Frank, got to join us, and we filmed a lot of the manual of arms and a lot of the marching for the 1874 Upton's manual. Just like Lewis and Clark said, we do this for posterity. We noted, I mean, the late Mike Schweitzer and I noted well over 10 years ago that nobody's ever done beyond what the manual has, a digital or really a good record of the manual. A lot of this stuff has been, especially on the 6 side, it's just been passed down. I had the benefit of being around gentlemen like Leonard Burse, World War II vet, fought with the last horse cavalry soldier in the state of North Dakota. A gentleman's gentleman. He taught me a lot of stuff. Roger Olson, who I hope Casey and Alec, you guys will get to meet. Roger Olson, our longtime serving first sergeant in the 6th Infantry. He taught us how to march, and we've been passing that down. So really getting the option to get on site last week, do a live for our encampment that's coming up July 13th and 14th to really show the site. I mean, we have, like we said earlier, the Bretherton House, the original building where Sitting Bull made peace with U.S. authorities. We have the Officer of the Day building, and we have a fully refurbished, historically accurate 1870s barracks. Has everything from the mess hall to the sergeant's room to showing the difference in the bunks, where we have 2-tiered bunks versus single-tiered. We have a lot to offer for our annual encampment in mid-July, like I said earlier. And it's really fun to see us working on a lot of really cool projects. Some we really can't announce yet, but we have a lot of fun and exciting things that we're constantly working on. And I think Ben can agree with me on that.
Thanks, Brandon.
That's right.
I'm going to pass her on over to Ben here. Ben, how about you talk to us a little bit about our next upcoming event that locally we get to do here with the 6th, along with, I'm not sure if you're able to talk about it, a pretty big project that's being worked on, that hopefully something will come to fruition with it, along with, if someone's interested in our neck of the woods of being a part of an organization like the 6th Infantry, how do they go about doing that?
Well, first thing, if you're interested, get a hold of one of us, either through the comments here in the video or our sites or Facebook or whatever. Just see us out and about. That's the easiest way to get in contact with us. As far as our next thing that's coming up here, we're doing the Band Aid Parade, annual Wilson Band Aid Parade. So that's a big thing for Wilson, North Dakota. And following that, Memorial Day weekend, we are having the annual flag raising at Fort Buford. That signifies the start of the tourist season out there. We help out with that. We stay the day out there as well. But be sure, like Brandon said, come on out for our annual encampment as July 13th and 14th. And be sure to go and check out the 5th Minnesota's things as well.
Well, thanks, Ben, and thanks everyone who got to be a part of our Drinking Through History episode tonight. Because, it's like I say at the end of every episode, it's always better when we history together. And nothing compares to these experiences that we get to have with like-minded people, delving into history and sharing that history, especially the nuanced stuff that just no one hears about. And that nuanced stuff really can make just those names and those images of those people come to life, make them a tangible person that hopefully we can all better understand. So again, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll look forward to the next time together we can enjoy Drinking Through History.